Welcome to the Interesting People podcast with your host, David Michael. Over the years, after talking with many people from all walks of life, in hospitals, nursing homes, jails, and on the street, David has discovered that if you talk with anyone long enough, you will find that everyone has experienced rich and compelling stories to share. So enjoy this episode of Interesting People, where everyone has a story to tell and everyone is interesting.
Hello, Dee. I'm glad you could join me today. So how are you doing today?
Pretty good, thank you. Glad to be here.
Good. Even though we've known each other for a while, some of these things I may know, but I just thought the folks listening would find them interesting. So you were born in Detroit, is it?
Just outside of Detroit, little town called Avon Township at the time, now Rochester Hills, yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. All right. And so your childhood, what was your family life?
I was the third child, the baby. I have two older sisters. We all do have different fathers. My father was my mother's third husband, and my mother and father got divorced when I was about 18 months old. My mother hooked up with a police officer while she was married to my dad, but she did eventually marry and stay together for 20 some odd years my stepdad, his name was Denny, and he did pass in 2005. So I had my two older sisters. We grew up in Michigan and went to Oklahoma for a little bit, way back when I was young, but we came back to Michigan rather quickly, and I've been here ever since.
Did you always live with all three sisters?
Yes, we all stayed together, typical family, mom, stepdad, three kids. My sisters, the middle one is 3 years older than me, and the oldest is 3 years older than her, so we're all 3 years apart. And
did your stepdad adopt you officially?
No adoption ever took place there. As a matter of fact, my mother's second husband adopted my mother's first child, my oldest sister, before the second child was even born. So my two sisters do consider themselves having the same father.
Okay, all right. And that family life, being raised by a police officer, was it kind of strict, or was it?
So when we came back from Oklahoma, we initially went to Hazel Park and ended up in a little teeny tiny town in Michigan called Clawson. If you blink, you drive through it and wouldn't even know. North side of Detroit there. Very nice, close-knit community. Everybody knew everybody, lots of children, very safe. So we got there probably about 1978, 1979, and stayed there for quite a long time.
Is that the city he was a police officer in?
No, he was a police officer in Sterling Heights. Then he had some sort of an injury, and his trigger hand, if you will, he had injury, so he didn't have full dexterity in that hand, and he did get out of the police force, and that's when we moved to Oklahoma, but we came back. So my stepdad, he worked as a security guard at a hospital in downtown Detroit, and he worked a midnight shift for many, many, many years. And so, we actually had a pretty okay childhood, lots of children in the neighborhood. This was back in the late 70s and the early 80s when it was a lot of people, a lot of children, a lot of neighborhood children. This was back in the day when kids actually played outside. And
I remember that.
Yes. And very safe community. We didn't lock our doors or anything back then. But of course, everybody has some skeletons there.
Do you mind talking about some of those skeletons?
Yeah, not at all. So my stepfather, he did have a gambling problem. He was generally a very grumpy person all the time, walking on eggshells, all of us. With that police officer type military kind of background structure is how we were raised. Like, we had to ask permission to do anything and everything. Can I have something to drink? I couldn't come home from school and plop down on the couch in the living room and turn on the TV. Oh no. Everything was very, very structured. So at this time, this is what we do. This is what you do. Very structured type of an environment. With my father working midnights, he would sleep during the day. So like in the summertime, we would have to go outside and play all day so he could sleep. He would wake up, between 3 and 3:30 in the afternoon. Dinner was at 4:30, which was basically his lunch, or breakfast anyway. And just a very rigorous. If you walked into our house, you would never know that there was 3 children that lived in that house. It was immaculate. You could eat off the floor. Everything had its place. Our bedrooms with a closed door might be a different story, though. But yeah, we had a very structured type of an environment. And my parents weren't really religious at all, but very young, when we first got to Clawson, my mother would befriend the neighborhood families and children on the parents and grandparents and whatnot. So I'm very thankful that my mom got us hooked up with these people. And so we had a lot of really good friends, good relationships, and we would go to church with our neighborhood friends and their family and things of that nature. But there was the big family secret.
And that was?
So my parents, they were pot dealers. And although we didn't have a lot of activity in the home of people coming, this was the family secret. They also smoked it all the time, like in the house, out in the open, 24/7, constantly.
Around you girls?
Oh, absolutely. Just all the time. It was just like they were smoking cigarettes or something. And
this is like 75, 80?
Yeah, this would be, 79, 80, and beyond for many, many years. And so
no medical marijuana back in those days.
Yeah, no medical marijuana back in those days.
So an ex-police officer smoking pot in front of his 3 daughters.
Yes, you got it.
Okay.
And this was the family secret. There was, of course, conversations with us that this was something that was a secret. We could not tell anybody about it. And me being the youngest, I was born in 75. That was a little bit of a burden for me personally.
Did you even understand the concept of what was going on?
I basically knew that it was illegal and that, like the police could come if people knew about this. So we were always just told that we're not to talk about it, we're not to tell anybody about it. And how that impacted me was that, I had my whole block. I could go around the block and play with dozens of kids and not even have to cross the street. So we were outside all the time. Me and my middle sister would hang out together a lot. We were more friends. My oldest sister was 6 years older than me, and she was kind of doing her own thing a lot. But when it comes to playing outside, I would tell you, my friends' parents would kind of be like, why can't you guys go to your house and play? And, things of that nature. So I could.
Nobody suspected anything.
Apparently not, from what I recall. Very blatant. It was very strange because my mom would grow pot plants in the front bay window. We had like a typical 3-bedroom ranch. You could smell it, like walking on the sidewalk in front of our house, windows open. There, you could totally smell it. But nobody ever really said anything. Nobody did anything. Nothing ever happened. I just know that this was a secret we weren't supposed to tell, and we were never allowed to go into our parents' bedroom. And my oldest sister said that she did. And she said there was garbage bags and garbage bags full. That's all I know on that.
Of course, at that time, it could have been some of those neighbors were doing the same thing, keeping their secrets, too.
Yes, this was the 70s. So
Yeah.
culturally, I wasn't obviously very aware being so young, but it was a big burden for me, and just dealing with my social life. And occasionally we could have people over to play. Of course, we could play outside in the yard, but when it comes to like people coming over and inside, that was a very rare occasion. Occasional birthday parties, very rarely like sleepovers with friends at my house. It was me and my middle sister always going to everybody else's houses and their sleepovers and different things like that.
So at this time, did you have any kind of relationship with your biological dad?
Yes. My biological father didn't live too far away, lived out in Shelby Township, Utica area. Had every other weekend, all the, Christmas vacations, summer vacations, things of that nature. He worked for Ford Motor Company for a very long time, especially through the 70s and 80s. I can remember there was a lot of unemployment back in the days of standing in the unemployment line. I would.
That was the 70s.
Yes,
And the 80s.
for sure. Those lines I'll never forget standing there with him. But he had introduced me to a lot of things in my life, and I always loved. My dad is still alive. He taught me a lot. Super highly intelligent guy. He had 4 siblings, and his parents, they were here in Michigan. My grandparents had went down to Florida. Of course, retired. That's where my dad is now. But just very interesting guy. I consider my dad being the one that kind of really gave me the only real normalcy in life, or fun, enjoyment, learning experiences, things of that nature.
Like what kind of things did you do when you were together with him? And it was just you and him?
Yes, it was me and him for various times. His sister, my Aunt Barb, and her son, my cousin Scott, would live with him periodically, off and on over the years. She was a single mom, and Scott, my cousin, kind of consider him my brother. So primarily, and my dad would have a roommate occasionally too, other than my aunt, a man that I would call my Uncle Dennis. He was a great guy. But yeah, my dad, super smart guy, really into sports. So we had season tickets to the Tigers, the Lions, the Red Wings before they were even popular. I was really into sports, very much of a tomboy, kind of a girl there. I didn't play with Barbie. I played with He-Man. And so he also was very, like I said, he was super highly intelligent. And I think it was about 1987 is when the book Communion with Whitley Strieber came out. My dad was always interested in UFOs. And he got that book. So I read that book when I was like 12 years old. It kind of fascinated me a little bit. And he taught me a lot too. We did like fishing. always out, going out to Stony Creek on the boat. We would often, usually at least once a year, go down to Florida and visit the grandparents, do deep sea fishing, things like that. And
What was his job at work?
he, for lack of the technical term, he put seat cushions in a crate. And he was colorblind, which I thought was weird because you had to tell the color of the fabric of the cushions and match them up. So I've always wondered if there was some cars out there that had some...
He had a blue seat and a green seat.
You got it. And he actually retired in 1999 from Ford and went down to Florida. And so he's down there living the retirement life. And since he moved down there, got a job maintaining golf course lawns there. So he mows the lawns and the greens and the fairways and all that at a really nice golf course in Florida. And different things have happened. I will say, boy, you think you know somebody, and then things happen. And hindsight is often 20/20.
Well, you were a little kid then, too.
Yes.
You weren't as aware of the world as you are now.
Exactly. So I was married when September 11th happened. I was married to my first husband, and I was living in a house with my husband in East Point. And my dad was up in Michigan for a family wedding. My cousin had got married just a few days before September 11th, and I had happened to call into work sick that day. And I was going to go back to bed because I really wasn't feeling well, and something told me just to stay up and get a cup of coffee and get some stuff done around the house if I could. Turned on the news, and I saw everything from the very beginning.
From the first building?
Yes,
Yeah.
From the first plane and the news, saw it
Did
all
you
live.
kind of feel like I did, like, I wonder if this is just an accident or some pilot went nuts on the first one, not thinking necessarily what it ended up being?
I remember the news people talking like that, but in my gut, in my soul, whatever you want to call it, immediately I knew that this was something very large and that more was going to be taking place. I was at home by myself at this time. My husband was at work, and my father, I think maybe because he was staying with us, but also staying with other family. So my father was not at home when this happened. He was out and about. And I knew that it was bad. I called my mother immediately, and she was poo-pooing my idea that this was something big. Oh, no, this was just an accident. Oh, no, whatever. And I was very adamant with her. And I got off the phone and, of course, glued to the TV like the rest of the world, right? And many hours later, in the late afternoon, early evening, finally, this is like before cell phones. I didn't have no cell phone or anything. My dad shows up. And my dad is a very strong man, very smart man, not a very emotional man, highly intelligent, very black and white, super smart. Never seen my dad cry except one time. And the one time before September 11th that I saw my father cry, we were actually, it had been many years before that, we were getting ready to go down to Florida to visit his parents, my grandparents, for our Christmas vacation. And we would always drive. Well, not always, but often we would drive. And so the night before we left, got a phone call that his mother died. My grandmother died suddenly.
and he dropped one tear. No sobbing, no typical. And
that one tear was pretty monumental.
yes, one tear was monumental. Just a very strong man. Like I said, very smart and just, get her done kind of a guy.
But was he crying when he came over on 9/11?
When 9/11 happened and he finally showed up that afternoon, he could not even speak. He was so upset, beside himself, undone, whatever you want to call it. Every time he tried to speak, nothing would come out. He was bawling his eyes out.
Wow.
And
total change of personality.
Yeah, completely out of character.
Why do you think that hit him so hard?
So after many hours of him trying to speak to me and not being able to, he grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and he started writing. My important papers are at this bank on this road in this city. Stuff like this. And I was utterly confused. And he's writing different things like this, his address, whatever.
Are you his only child?
Yes, I am his only child.
Okay.
So after a couple more hours, finally he could kind of talk a little bit. He was still very, very emotional. And of course, the whole world is, kind of going crazy and all the shock and everything.
Yeah, they declared a state of war.
Yeah. So, and this is why I say, boy, you think you know somebody. He mentioned no details, generic dealings with the CIA.
That he had, or just things he knew, really?
No, that he had.
Okay.
And he told me at that time that there was a $50,000 price tag on his head because his name was on a list of names that was obtained by Afghani terrorists. And the only other thing that he disclosed at that time was that he was instructed to never, ever cross the Canadian border from Michigan into Canada because these terrorists are lined there. And that's all he told me at that time. Hours and hours.
And you know your dad well enough to know he's not the kind that's going to be delusional and make up some kind of story. Did you ever have anything in the past that gave any kind of hint or illusion that your dad was into something maybe secretive, or he was trying to hide something from you?
When you're living life and having, the relationship with the parents, and a lot of things happen. I ended up in my teens, having to live with my biological dad, and I left my mom and my stepdad and went and lived with him in Shelby.
That house was filled with secrets.
Yeah. So, hindsight is 20/20 again. So now that time has gone on and I've obtained a little bit more information, nothing really specific, but then you start thinking about things. So when I was 14 years old, some major stuff went down. Had to leave my mother and my stepfather and my sisters and go live with my biological dad. I was very, very rebellious, and things were going on. And I've now learned that at this exact time when I was pulling a lot of stuff, being a bad teenager.
No. Teenagers are bad? I never knew that.
Yeah. I have since learned that at that same time, when I was transitioning to go live with him, he was actually being heavily recruited. It's my understanding by FBI, CIA. FBI came out years later, you know. So he had to turn them down because of me and what was going on and how he had to take custody of me.
Why do you think a guy who puts seats in boxes for the big three is being recruited by the CIA and the FBI?
He did actually, before he, actually, I think he started at Ford and then he went into the Navy. So
So that was military. Okay.
Absolutely. He's a military guy. He was in the Navy. Don't know too much specifics about ranks or anything. He's a little bit of an odd duck. It's hard to get like direct answers out of him, and it's always these weird stories. So all I know is he was on an aircraft carrier. I do know that he was stationed in Guam. And basically, it's my understanding that he was the smart guy in the bottom of the plane in the belly, having to do all the calculations of when to drop bombs and how much fuel we have and all this type of a thing.
That takes some intellect.
Yeah. So that's the only thing I know. He served his time in there, got out, and kept his seniority at Ford. So he retired at 48 years old in 1999.
I just thought of something. You think this guy Dennis, who came and stayed with him from time to time, might have been connected in some way? I mean, how much did you know about this guy Dennis?
I really didn't know anything about Dennis other than he was my dad's friend. Super nice guy. Uncle Dennis to me. Was his roommate. I didn't know anything about him at all. So, yeah, you think you know somebody. And you talk about, like, things. So, and I can remember, like, when I'm learning this stuff about my father after September 11th happened, and thinking back, telephone conversations, the clicking noises on the phones, my dad is a drinker, has always been a drinker, never really did any drugs that I know of. Sometimes over the years you get a little loose-lipped and then he would, catch himself and, can't talk about that or whatever. So that's kind of like how, FBI came into play many, many years later, kind of talking or what have you. But yeah, just very, very interesting. He actually had in Shelby Township, he was sitting at the local restaurant, the Ram's Horn there, and he told me a story about a huge giant UFO that was right nearby. And he was sitting in the restaurant, and there was police officers that were also in the restaurant, and he heard the police officers' radios going off, talking about a UFO, and
did they call it a UFO?
I do believe so. Unidentified flying object, I think, is terminology or whatever.
Was this during the day or evening?
It was. I don't know if it was day or evening. I think it was more like evening.
Okay.
And from what I remember the story, haven't heard it in years, but he said that he could tell from the radio on the police officers that this UFO that was spotted nearby was in a certain area, north, south, whatever it was, and the police ran out of the building, jumped in their cars, and went in the complete opposite direction of where this object had been.
I guess they didn't want to see it.
Right. So, yeah, my dad always had like this interest in aliens and really introduced me to that very young. Like I said, I read Communion when I was 12.
Yeah, that's a very interesting book, and that's, for you as a young girl to read that, put a lot of new way of thinking in your head, opening your view about life.
Yes, absolutely. And that is kind of the primary
theme of my life throughout the years, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, many decades, this alien UFO ghost kind of things.
Had you ever experienced anything like that yourself?
Absolutely, absolutely. Living in Clawson with my mom and my stepdad and my sisters, I very vividly remember two different incidences. I don't know which one happened first. They were very close in the same amount of time. I know that because my middle sister and I shared a bedroom, and something we would do for fun to switch it up is just switch around the furniture. Well, both of these incidences, our room was set up the same, which tells me it was around the same time. So the first one was I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. We had single beds, one on one side, one on the other side of the room. And just suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, didn't know why, and sat there for a second, and I was wide awake. And I heard all this commotion in the living room. It sounded like my parents were having a party. And I could hear many different people talking. I could hear laughter. I could hear what sounded like champagne glasses clinging. Actually, it was the roach clip tapping on the ashtray. A familiar sound to me. And I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, it's the middle of the night. What are they doing, you know?
Did you go out and look and see?
Yes. So after a minute, I go out of the bedroom, down the hall into the living room. It's the middle of the night. It's pitch dark. And I can remember opening my eyes as wide as I could. This was probably around, my best guess, be like 1982. I was maybe like 7. Could have been 1981. Rubbing my eyes. I'm not seeing anything, but I heard all of this commotion and people talking and laughing. And I slowly traveled through the living room, and I got to the kitchen area, which was at the back of the house. There was a doorway to go to the galley kind of kitchen with the dining table at the end of the kitchen, back of the house. Now, I don't recall if the light was on or off in the kitchen when I got there. I think it had to be off, simply because when I went into the living room, it was pitch black, and I'm rubbing my eyes trying to see who's saying all the stuff that I'm hearing. Never saw anything. So I get to the kitchen.
And you're still hearing this?
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, by the time I get to the kitchen, I don't hear the commotion in the living room anymore. And I had to have turned on the light switch that's right there at the beginning of the kitchen. And I remember it being light in the kitchen, and the cupboard right by me was wide open. And I'm like, well, that's strange. So I looked down the kitchen to the dining room table, and there was a box of Pop's cereal that was sitting on the table, knocked over and spread out all over the table. And I can remember in my mind going like, what is going on here? Just being...
You're not dreaming. You're awake.
Oh, I'm physically, totally awake. Totally awake. This is definitely not a dream. And so I'm looking at this Pop cereal that is spilled all over the table. And I'm like, wow, thinking to myself, this is just weird. And at that moment, we had a clock in our living room that would ding on the hour and on the quarter hour.
And at that moment, when I'm trying to figure out why the darn cereal is spilled all over the table, I heard my parents' bedroom door open. And obviously, my dad was not working that night. This was his night off. So I also heard the clock dung, ding, ding. It was 2:00 in the morning. And I freaked out because I knew that my dad was awake. And I ran as fast as I could back into my bedroom. I heard the dog come out of their bedroom. And I'm laying there in my bed freaking out because I'm going to get in trouble for spilling cereal all over the kitchen table. A few moments later, I hear, the rustling in my parents' bedroom, and he was like getting dressed. He was taking the dog for a walk at 2:00 in the morning. Again, he worked midnight, so he was kind of awake, kind of doing his thing or whatever. So I'm back in my bed, and I hear him come out of that room, and I am just waiting for him to freak out because that cereal was spilled all over the kitchen table. And never happened. I hear him walk through the living room, go to the kitchen, back door, put the dog on the leash, and they went for a walk. So I fell back asleep. I'm like, okay, whatever. Never got up to check anything. I was just kind of freaking out, and I didn't want to get in trouble.
So was anything said the next day?
So
was it still cereal all over the table when you got up?
The next day, I told my parents what happened, and they were just trying to tell me that I was dreaming, and they would not believe me. And I was very serious and emphatic about what I was saying because I was very confused. It was very, very perplexing. I knew that I was awake. I knew that this was physical. I knew I saw what I saw. So as I'm telling them what happened, and they were just poo-pooing me again, telling me I had a dream, I looked at my dad and I said, "You took Dusty for a walk at 2:00 in the morning, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes, I did." I said, "And you didn't see any cereal on the table when you got there?" He said nothing was out of place.
And why would they clean that up? If it was like one of them going for a midnight snack or something, and why would they clean that up and then not tell you?
Right.
Unless, maybe they were just stoned out of their head and they're like going for some munchies and they spilled it and they didn't want you to know. But
doesn't make any sense. The time between me running back into my room when I saw that cereal on the table, from that time to my dad coming out and getting into that kitchen was probably about 45 seconds. And it wasn't there when he got in the kitchen.
And when you went in the living room, before you went in the kitchen, turned the light on, even though you're in the living room, it's dark and you still heard the sounds?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
and
it's a little unusual.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, yeah.
You said there was another one.
Yeah, so right around the same time, don't know if it was before or after.
Same year?
Probably within the same year.
Okay.
I know for a fact that this one here now that I'm talking about, that was summertime. Probably like 1982, 7 years old. And I was woken up in the middle of the night for some unknown reason. And I can remember, I'm a very visual person, very visual. I'm very, I can remember a lot. I can remember all the way back when I was like 18 months old. I have memories. A lot of people can't remember when they're that young, but I do have a lot of very vivid memories. Very visual person. So I wake up, I'm laying in my bed,
And I'm wondering why I'm waking up. And I noticed that it was very light on the inside of my room. And we had those shades. So like my bed, the head of my bed was up against the back wall of my house. My sister and her bed was on the other side of the room. Our beds were on opposite ends of the room, and there was a window to the backyard in between our beds. And I woke up and I realized that I knew it was the middle of the night, but I noticed that it was light in my room, and I just found that very strange. And just a few moments go by, and I look over and I can see my sister moving around and waking up herself. So here we are, both of us. She still remembers this to this day very vividly, like I do. And we're looking at each other, and we're kind of talking to each other. And I can remember looking around the room thinking, wow, why is it light? So we look over out the window, and we had those little pull shade things, that they're kind of flat. I remember those, yep. So we open the shade, and we're little, so we're standing on our beds. I'm on mine, she's on hers, and we're at the edge of the opposite sides of the window looking outside. And I was super perplexed. I knew it was the middle of the night, but it was so bright outside. I never saw a source of light, but it was almost like it was broad daylight.
Are you facing the front of the house, back of the house?
This is the back of the house. So I'm looking the backyard. We're standing there, and we're talking to each other. And I'm realizing it is so bright, but it wasn't like normal daylight. And way back then, we didn't have these blue tinted LED lights. But that is the tone that I saw. It's like everything. It almost seemed like it was broad daylight with this funny bluish tinted light. And I can remember talking to my sister saying, where is that light coming from? And we're looking and looking. She's looking around saying, I have no idea what's going on. We're standing there, and I can remember the way that my block was shaped. My house, it was kind of like a pie-shaped block. So my backyard, I had three sides. On the right side, that was the street that we lived on with those neighbors. On my left side, I had a house, but at the back of the yard, I could see multiple people's yards from my backyard. Even though this was the middle of the night, it was so bright with this bluish tinted light. It was like everything was so crisp and clean. And I can remember thinking to myself, as I'm looking straight out, I'm like, wow, that's Jenny Gibson's backyard. How can I see that clearly in the middle of the night? I was very, very confused.
Okay.
And
did you hear any sounds or anything, or wind blowing, or?
I do not recall hearing anything.
Okay. Did you see anything that maybe where this light was emanating from?
Never. I just looked and looked all the way around, never found a source of where this light could be from. It was very strange.
How long did the light stay there?
We were probably standing up, looking out that window, I would guess somewhere maybe between 5 and 10 minutes, trying to figure out what was going on. My sister's like, I have no idea what's going on. And the weird thing about it is, that's the last thing that I remember. is I was on my bed, she was on her bed. We were looking out the window, trying to determine the source of this crazy blue tint light. I do not remember laying back down or anything. The next thing I know, it's morning, we're waking up. I do believe it was a Saturday morning, so that was probably a Friday night when that happened. And everything was just kind of normal initially.
Did your sister say to you, what in the world happened last night? Did you talk about it?
No, initially we didn't. Just kind of got up and did our thing. So, while later, all of a sudden, we hear our dad scream our names. Get out here! And he was in the backyard. So, I look at my sister, and we have no idea what's going on and why he's so mad. Obviously, he was screaming when you say those names like that and get out here. Oh no, something's wrong. We're in trouble. So, we go outside into the backyard. And he's standing like in the middle, off to the right side, in the grass. And we go up to him, and he points down at the ground. And he's like, you guys were playing with matches. And we weren't playing with matches. I could not believe what I saw. I was trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Basically, it was a perfect circle, about 12 inches in diameter, donut shape. What now most people would call maybe like a crop circle or something, but it was only a foot across. And in the center, where the donut hole would be, it was perfect circle, nice green grass in the center. But that ring was completely brown and dead. But I can remember standing there looking at it, perplexed, like, because I'm getting accused of playing with matches when I didn't, and I'm in trouble, you know. And I can remember that the grass, it was brown, but it wasn't like burnt. It was like smashed down in a circle, like a crop circle would be. At this time, I'm like 7 years old. I didn't know anything yet about aliens and crop circles.
So it didn't look like it was scorched and burned, just brown from something rusting on it.
Yeah, right. Yes. Like, you know, if you leave the hose out and it makes it brown in the grass. But everything was smushed down. So
and that wasn't there the day before.
Obviously, no. So, and he's like, you guys were playing with matches. And I'm like, no, we weren't. And I look over at my sister and I said, do you remember that light? And she's like, yeah, what was that?
Did you tell your dad about the light?
Yes, we were trying to explain to him what had happened the night before.
And what did he say?
He basically just thought we were lying and told us that
an excuse.
Right, and that so we were lying, and so we got grounded for playing with matches and burning the grass.
Okay.
So that was.
And then, so you were like how old? About 7 at this time?
Probably 1981, 1982, right in there. I was 6 or 7 years old.
And you were 12 when you read communion.
Correct.
So 5 years later, you must have instantly related the two.
No.
Oh, you didn't?
I did not. I actually didn't come up with an idea of the blue light and the burn hole on the grass until way later, like in my 30s, maybe even early 40s. So just kind of strange. It just took a long time, and just trying to piece these different things together over the years was very strange.
Did you ever tell your biological dad the blue light story?
I imagine I probably did, simply because who he was and, the things that he was interested in, took me to Raiders of the Lost Ark at the theater way back. Scared the heck out of me. I don't know what year that came out, but I think I was a little too young.
1981.
Oh, see, this is all around the same time. And that
No, yeah, 81. Yep,
81. Yeah, that freaked me out. But I imagine I would have told my dad that. But I don't have any memory of telling my biological father
I
about
wonder what his take would be on that, with what he knows and what he's experienced.
Right, and that's the thing, is trying to communicate with my biological father. It's a game. You never get a straight answer, and it's just very strange.
Well, I've learned over the past that a lot of times paranormal, supernatural, occultic things, they all kind of interlace with one another. And, a house that's got heavy drug use and, all those things open up portals and doors to different things and invite that kind of activity. A lot of times where there's a lot of occultic activity, people see what they used to say UFOs, now they're UAPs. I guess by changing the name, it doesn't make you sound so goofy.
Right.
But, so you had a lot of different entities going on in your life at the same time, so.
Yes. And, rebellious teenager, even like the Ouija board thing. Had some really weird experiences, loss of time after playing with a Ouija board when I was a teenager. I did basically, I left home when I was 16 years old, never went back, so I've kind of like been on my own since I was 16.
Did you do a lot of Ouija board activity? Or just a game because it was a fun game?
Yes, I didn't realize what I was getting into, and I didn't realize what that was all about. I mean, ghosts, right? But
yeah, Parker Brothers took what was called the witches' table and they popularized it to bring it into popular society, which I think in the movie The Exorcist, it starts out by the little girl up in the attic saying, "Mommy, Mommy, where's my Ouija board?" And people are like, "Oh, come on, it's just a game." But it's not just, it may be a game to you, but not to the spirit world.
Right. Actually, the very first time I was introduced to the Ouija board was from my biological father's sister, my Aunt Barbara. My cousin Scott, they were living with my dad, and my Aunt Barbara was into that kind of stuff. She had some experiences, and she was very much like my father in the way that it's never very easy to get a straight answer out of anybody. Boy, was she a great storyteller, but very, very young. She put me and my cousin on a Ouija board, and I mean, it just started moving immediately, and I just freaked out, and I stopped that. I was young. I was like 5, maybe 6 years old. And
was she playing with anything else, tarot cards or seances, or that you know of?
I might have a memory of a possible tarot card, but can't hold me accountable on that one. I'm not sure. She passed not too long ago.
And she's the one that stayed with your dad from time to time.
Yes, she would stay with my father from time to time.
Anything unusual ever happen at your dad's house?
Oh, yeah. So, yep, there was, I know for sure, my dad told me of a very specific incident that had occurred in the middle of the night. So my dad lived in the house, and then his friend Dennis, I called him my Uncle Dennis, great fun guy, whatever. Don't know much about him, but he had this, in the middle of the night, the smoke alarm goes off. Very, very loud smoke alarm. This is out in Shelby Township. Actually, it might have been Utica, right on the border there. And so my dad's woken up, middle of the night, smoke alarm going off real loud. My dad wakes up, he stands up, and he said that from about 3.5 feet off the ground to the ceiling, the whole entire house was filled with what he thought initially was smoke. So he got down on his hands and knees crawled out of his bedroom, going into the kitchen because he was assuming that there was a fire of some sort in the kitchen. He gets into the kitchen. He's at the oven. There's nothing going on. There's no fire. And he's perplexed. And he said it was very, very thick, white smoke.
Did it smell like something burning?
I don't recall him saying anything. Actually, if I remember correctly, I think him saying it was weird because it looked like smoke, but he didn't smell smoke.
Okay.
And so he's going around the house into the laundry room on his hands and knees because the smoke was so thick. But, lower to the ground, it wasn't there. So as he's traveling to the laundry room, he's thinking to himself, what the heck is Dennis doing? Why isn't he getting up? This smoke alarm that was like the loudest smoke alarm I've ever heard. It was so loud. Wake the dead, So.
And it was still going off even though he's in the kitchen.
Yes, it's going off this whole entire time. So he's going through the dining area into the laundry room. And while he's doing that, he's like, all right, why isn't Dennis waking up? What the heck is going on? He gets into the laundry room, no fire, completely perplexed. So then he starts coming back toward the main part of the house, and he finally heard his roommate Dennis rustling around and moving around and getting up. So he's kind of like kitchen hallway area, again, just like a typical 3-bedroom ranch for the area here. And he said as soon as he heard Dennis put his hand on his bedroom door to open that door, at the exact same time that door was opening, it was like a huge giant vacuum. And all that super thick smoke that was throughout the whole entire house, in less than a second, just instantly sucked out of the bathroom window that was cracked open about 1/4 of an inch. Instantly. Wow. So by the time Dennis opened the door fully,
it was gone.
All the smoke was gone. Now, my dad's sister knew Dennis, my Aunt Barb, and the only thing that she ever said, she had some of these kind of psychic kind of experiences and could see auras and things like that.
Well, Ouija boards and tarot cards will get you there.
Yeah. And she always said that particular experience about the smoke in the house and it sucking out the bathroom window, like instantly, had something to do with Dennis. But that's all she would say to us children. I have tried asking her years later before she died, and she would never go into anything. So, yeah, that was another very interesting experience. And this kind of like stayed with me, like I said, for many, many years. And as I previously mentioned, my mother had got us to go to church with like the neighborhood families and children, and I loved it. I knew it. I accepted it. I just knew that I knew that I knew that what I was hearing was the truth, and Jesus is who he said he was. And even though all these years go by and I go through these horrible, crazy, drinking, doing drugs, teenage rebellion thing, I always had that truth in me. And so as time goes on, these different experiences and other things, dreams, things like that, I had to figure it out. And for a long time, that was a huge internal conflict for me because I knew about God, I knew about Jesus, but I was completely fascinated with
the paranormal, the ghosts, the aliens, and I couldn't fit that in my box of my faith.
Yeah, most people don't understand how closely they are related, because it's all the spirit world.
Yes, yes.
And the Bible speaks very definite about, like the book of Revelation, a third of the stars, the dragon drew with his tail, and those godly angels became fallen angels, and that's the paranormal world that's going around now, trying to get us involved in it. But yeah, most people, like when I first became a Christian and I was into astral projection and, all these things, and if I talked to a pastor or a Christian, they'd look at me like I had three eyes. They didn't know how to relate. Most people don't understand how those blend in perfectly. And the Bible's got a lot to talk about it. Ask, Elijah and the whirlwind going up into heaven, and, just... And so as a young girl, all those things that happen to you, obviously, are going to make you confused. And reading the communion, and then, grasping and holding on to that faith of Jesus. And it's like, are these two separate worlds? But they're not.
You are exactly right, and it took decades and decades and decades for me to come to what I now know is the right answer.
Well, like we were talking about, how people don't understand how the two worlds do connect, that there is an understanding, there is an explanation that's scriptural, that explains why these two seem to be going on at the same time. The difference between the paranormal, which means the word para means around, so the things going around, what's normal in the world, versus supernatural. Super means above, the things that come from God. So God, like Moses, his staff turned into a serpent. That's supernatural. But Pharaoh had his magicians, their staffs turned into serpents. That's paranormal. But the supernatural, Moses' staff, consumed the three that were counterfeits of Satan's, and good always overcomes evil. So, you're a little girl, you've had some exposure to Scripture and the truth of the Bible, you've had all these experiences in the past. So when did it really start to click together and you started to, have a more of a mature understanding and faith of, your place in the world and who God is and who Jesus is? And when did all this kind of click in for you?
Well, even just going back a little bit before that, just because of like my own personal experiences, and what I've mentioned here is just a few. Just very intriguing to me, trying to make sense out of it. Like I said, I'm just a very kind of black and white, right, wrong, ones and zeros kind of a gal, right? With this internal conflict, I would... Things like, of course, the television, the stupid box I call it now, the ghost hunting shows, the ancient alien TV shows. These fascinated me, and I just could not get enough of it. Like I said, there's that internal conflict. Because I am a Christian. I believe in the God of the Bible. I believe in Jesus. And I was really trying to understand what these other things are. Watching these shows constantly, like taking up all of my time trying to figure it out. I just had to figure it out.
So on the surface, they seem diametrically opposed.
Yes, they sure do. They sure do. And that's why I felt like I just had this huge conflict in me, and I needed to figure it out and what it is. So I was raised in a very mild Baptist church in Clawson. never got too much into prophecy or anything like that. We sung hymnals, nobody raised their hands, and very mild. But I was taught the Word of God, went to the Awana, love that, approved workmen are not ashamed, kind of Jesus style of the Boy/Girl Scouts or whatever. And through that, got that Bible scripture pounded into my brain. So I knew it. I know the scripture. I knew that I had the truth. I prayed all the time. I was so thankful to God and thanking him all the time, very young, for being an American, having the luxuries that I had. Even though technically we were poor, I knew I was rich. But when it came to the more mature, deeper things, angels, demons type of things, that church didn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. So I was wandering around for decades, going to different churches as I was growing up. And like I said, I always had this internal conflict. I church hopped for a very, very long time before I finally felt like I got somewhere that got it. And you kind of mentioned before about people looking at you like you have three eyes. Well, I always felt like people looking at me like I have three heads. I mean, the things that I would talk about and trying to connect and rectify in my mind. And it's kind of crazy, somebody that I don't even deal with now, because what the enemy means for harm, God can turn into good.
Yes, he can.
And many years ago now, 7, 8 years ago, met a person standing in line at a flea market where I was a vendor, flipping some antiques or whatever, and was eavesdropping on a conversation of some people standing next to me. Won't even mention the name of the individual because it makes my blood curdle. He was talking about this type of stuff through a biblical view. He was talking about aliens and demons and what they are and what is going on in the world. And so I was just eavesdropping as somebody in her early 40s on these two old guys. One's a Vietnam vet, saw his hat, and so anyhow, that person got me on a path that was corrupt, I now know. But through that person, other things happened. And it's like, the webs that are weaved, or maybe not even, that's more of a negative connotation there. But just God's hand, guiding me, seeking truth the whole time. That's all I wanted was the truth, to understand and rectify this internal conflict of God and ghosts and aliens. And now even with the recent, disclosure, we've been seeing it for years, spoon-feeding us very soft disclosure about aliens. But they're not aliens from outer space like most people think. In my mind, that's what I know, and that's how I rectify it,
They're just fallen angels.
Yes.
Like Paul said, even if a messenger or an angel from heaven came and brought a gospel other than what we've given you, let him be accursed. And that means a messenger from from outer space or the universe. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No apologies there needed. Very, very huge conflict in me. So, again, I'm just seeking truth. I'm trying to rectify this stuff. Well, there's another incident that had happened a long time ago, about 20 years ago now. I was in my mid-20s. I was married to my first husband. And this was a very profound moment in my life. And it was a dream that I had had. So I'm going to tell the dream here. Again, I'm just a very visual person. And, I don't have dreams like this all the time. And, I call them God dreams because certain things happen in these dreams. I've had many dreams that is not just, had a bad taco the night before or anything. Obviously, somebody's trying to convey something here. So I'm married to my first husband. I had the most intense dream, and this is how it goes. I'm dreaming that I am in one of the houses that I grew up in Clawson. Growing up with my mom and dad and my two sisters, we lived in two different houses. So the dream started in the second house that we were at. And I'm sitting at the kitchen table eating food. And I look out the window and I see this man way up in the sky in the clouds, kind of flying around. Not like Superman, he was like upright. And I had caught this out of the corner of my eye. So I put down my food, I go to the window, and I'm looking out the window. And I just see this man in the clouds. And I was like totally perplexed. So he then proceeds to continue moving through the air. So instead of going outside in my dream, I stayed in the house and went through all the different rooms of the house to look out the window to try to see this man that is like in the clouds. Didn't have a suit on or anything like that. It was just a guy kind of standing upright, and his leg was a little bit cocked a little bit. It was just very strange. And I wanted to follow this man that I see flying in the sky. So as I'm going room by room, and he keeps moving along, he's technically going north. And when I get down the hall, the house that I was in initially, it was the second house that we lived in Clawson. So by the time I get to the end of the hallway, it had transformed into the first house that we lived in, a little bit of a smaller house, different layout. So the end of that hallway, toward the west, was my oldest sister's bedroom. And the door was closed. So I can remember the shag carpet. I could feel that red shag carpet on my feet. And I opened the door, and I didn't walk in right away. As I opened the door, back then when we lived at the house, my sister had the creepiest porcelain doll wallpaper. And it was like the whole room was filled with these porcelain dolls, kind of creepy, but whatever. That was the wallpaper that she had in that room. So in my dream, when I open the door, I see the room and I see the wallpaper. And then I took the step to go into the room. And at the very moment that I walked into that room, bam, I'm somewhere else. I don't know if I'm in another dimension. Alls I know is instantly, as soon as I crossed the threshold of that doorway, I was in pure white, with no up, no down, a warm, radiant comfort, white light. And then the next thing I know, there's this person in front of me, dressed in a white robe.
Is he the one you saw in the sky?
He was the one that I was going after and following in the sky. Yes, you are correct. And I never saw his face. It was like radiant and blinding, and you couldn't see the face. And very calm, very peace, no fear. And I'm in this enveloped in white, warm, comfort light. And there was no audible conversation going. This was totally telepathic, but almost audible. Hard to describe, but it was not audible. But I could understand. And he gets really close to me. And he's standing, like a foot away from me. And he reaches out his hands. And he says, telepathically, "This is my gift I give to you. Look down at your hands." And my hands were also reached out toward him, and I looked down at my hands. And my hands were emanating the most beautiful, brilliant blue light, for lack of a better term, that I have ever seen in my life. Just probably emanating from my hands out, I don't know, 1.5 inches. And it was like the deepest, most intense blue I've ever seen. And that was it. The next thing I know, I'm back in reality, but in the dream. I'm in the world on Earth here, because I don't know where that was. It was just all white and warm and light and no up or down.
Are you still in your sister's bedroom?
No, I was outside in the world, walking around. There's traffic, there's stores, there's people. And I knew what I had just experienced, and I knew in the dream who that person was. I knew that that was Jesus. And so in the dream, I'm walking around the world, and my hands are still glowing this crazy blue light. And I was super, super excited. And I am going to everybody I can find outside in the world, saying, look at my hands. This is a gift that Jesus gave me. And I'm just going all, nobody wanted to hear anything I had to say. Everybody just poo-pooed the idea. Didn't want to hear it, didn't want to look at it. I think that they could see it, but they didn't care. Maybe they couldn't see it. I do not know. So,
did you ever get any kind of message or inclination or feeling of what that blue meant at that time?
At that moment, no. It was life. That's all I could do to describe it, was that it was life. And that's all I knew. So, all these people out in the world, here, look at my hands. Look at what Jesus gave me. I got 3 heads or whatever. Nobody's, So there was one person that I knew from a long time ago. A former friend's father-in-law was a missionary in Africa. And I'm like, okay, this guy's going to believe me. So I'm, going crazy trying to find this guy in his house. And I finally, find his house and his wife. See, hey, Marty, where's your husband?
This was in real life?
No, this is in the dream.
Okay.
I'm looking for this guy that I knew that, was a big, big believer and a missionary in Africa, previously and all that stuff. So I even get to this guy. When I finally get to him, he's like in this boxed out
underground basement workshop with all these tools and stuff. Archie, Jesus came to me. Look what he gave me. And I'm showing him my hands that are just emanating this most beautiful blue light I've ever seen. He poo-pooed it. So I wake up. And it was like a very sudden jump, wake up, whoa. And I was completely elated. I knew what I had experienced. I knew who it was. And instantly when I woke up, my first thought was that Jesus gave me the gift of healing. That was my first thought, not in the dream, but in my waking state. I'm like, okay, I can heal people. God gave me this gift to heal people. I was all excited. So I called my mother.
It's funny how our mind rushes to try to come up with an explanation.
Yes.
When it may or may not be the correct one, but we're looking for some kind of answer.
Right. It was just so intense and so real, but not. It's just very hard to describe. But yes, it was like, so I called my mom, who, is not a believer in Jesus or anything. She used to be a long time ago and walked away and all that kind of a thing. And she poo-pooed me. It's just a dream. Did you eat some bad pizza? Poo-poo. And I was very bummed out. Just because I knew that I knew that I knew that the creator of the universe came to me. Who am I? So I just kind of, I'm like in my mid-20s at this time and still searching for truth. Even though I was a believer, I believed in Jesus, but I'm still, it was very early on, still me trying to reconcile in my mind all these different experiences, ghosts, aliens. Oh my gosh, this was, Jesus. What's going on here? So, I'm just very thankful because hindsight, like I said before, is 2020. And boy, do I see how I've been kept in his hand, especially now with this recent disclosure. I'm just so surprised. Actually, not really. The, biologics disclosure from the hearings in Congress or whatever about these aliens. They're not aliens from outer space, people. They're demons. And
it's interesting how even though these very credible witnesses testify to the United States Congress under sworn oath, and instead of the media going nuts like, look at what's been said, they're downplaying it. They're trying to say, well, that's not really what they meant. Or that's not, Jesus said there's none so blind as those who will not see.
Yeah, I think they have more important things to do, like, squash some political opponents or something.
Yeah. So, let me ask you a question. We're going to pretend that everybody in the planet Earth is listening to us right now. And you have their attention. What would you, here's your final message. Well, not final, we're not saying your life's over.
Thank you.
This is your message to the planet Earth. What would you say?
Wake up. Seek truth. Time is short. Consider Jesus. God does not send us to hell. We choose ourselves. Don't go. There is a way. And I think the majority of the people on this planet are severely, severely deceived, selfish. Look around you. People are going mad, crazy. Right is wrong, wrong is right, up is down. Even
non-religious people are seeing this. Consider the truth. Seek the truth. Ask him. Talk to him. We can talk to God. We don't have to be this structured, patterned, type of we can talk to him. He wants to be with us. That's the whole point of this, is he wants us to willfully choose his way. Please, please consider Jesus before it's too late. Bad things. Think it's bad now? This ain't nothing. We're going to see horrible, horrible times. So, time is short. Wake up.
You know, as you were saying that, I'm not saying this is the interpretation of the dream when you saw Jesus with the blue hands, but as you're saying that, I'm looking at you. Now, nobody else can see this because we're just audio, but you just spoke into a blue-colored mic words of wisdom that the vast majority of the planet Earth doesn't even comprehend. And when he said, "This is my gift to you," he gave you eternal life, and he gave you an understanding that most people don't have. And you just said through a blue mic a message that hopefully everybody in the world will hear in some way or the other. So I want to thank you, Dee, for being with me today and for proving what this podcast is entitled, that everybody's interesting. Everyone's got a story. And thank you for sharing yours with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
God bless you. Go in peace.